Bismillah, wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulillah. I congratulate people for being here. I know it's tough. Night of the 27th, and may Allah accept our qiyam, our siyam, and our charities. I know a lot of people stayed up last night. So, alhamdulillah, for you guys for being here, whoever could make it, alhamdulillah. So, today we're talking about the modern history of Palestine. So, just to recap, we've been talking about the progression of what started as the land of Palestine and how through the years, being 1917, the first one, where before the declaration, the Balfour Declaration, and we see how the land has been shrinking and being pretty much shredded throughout the time. Just to recap, and alhamdulillah, the benefit of this modern period of history is a lot of our parents and our grandparents, we've been through this, we've lived through this. So you have first-hand account on individuals that lived through this. If you're of Palestinian heritage, alhamdulillah, you have an even greater responsibility since the whole existence and the culture of the Palestinian people is being criminalized, and just talking about it is an act of resistance. So inshallah, even if you're not from the Palestinian background or living in that area, just ask them, because this place, alhamdulillah, this earth is very, very beloved to every Muslim all across the world, and everyone ties events in their lives to this cause. So definitely you can get a first-hand account of the history from your parents, from your relatives, and do share that and raise awareness. Inshallah, we stopped at the Camp David Accord in like the 1979, 1980, and we're going to start from there in this presentation. And I know I've been given 20 minutes. It's a very short time to give justice to this topic, subhanAllah, but we need to honor our time and your time as well. So I will try to keep it within that 20 minutes, bi'idhnillah, inshallah. So let's get right into it then, inshallah. Here's a quote says, "We are a nation threatened by disappearance." It was made by Isa and Yusuf in Palestine on the May 7th. And we try to guess what year you think this was. So inshallah, later in the presentation, let's try to see if you guys can kind of ballpark a date on when you think this statement was made. So in 1980, this is a timeline on a different major event that took place around this time. And inshallah, we'll be hitting all the major topics. Like I said, to concise it in 20 minutes, inshallah, we're just going to be hitting the high points. Inshallah, the goal is for you to kind of pick up the major points and do your own research, read up on it, and raise awareness from these presentations. So like I said, 1980, the Sinai was returned to Egypt. 1982, the Lebanon War started. And the whole goal was the elimination or to destroy the PLO. What is the PLO? Is the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was founded in 64 in Cairo with the complementary goal of Arab unity and the liberation of Palestine. A side note to that is in 1987, they were termed or declared as a terrorist organization. And subhanAllah, you see the same pattern. All these freedom fighters, be it the ANC in South Africa, be it the freedom movement, India, Pakistan, everywhere you have these grassroots movements for freedom, they're often labeled as a terrorist organization when they start off. So the PLO later became the Palestinian Authority, which has like the first chairman, and the president was Yasser Arafat, and we'll get to see what he did and what he was able to accomplish later as well. So when Israel invaded Lebanon, the state of Israel likes to give these cute names, these military operations that it starts. So the name that they placed on this operation was Peace for the Galilee. And the Galilee is the area north of Israel towards the southern port of Lebanon. And one of the major events that occurred was a massacre at Sabra and Shatila refugee camp. So basically what happened was the Israeli army was in charge in surrounding the camp, and they allowed a different militia organization called the Phalange to kind of go in September 16th through the 18th in 82 and just wreak havoc and kill, plunder. For 40 hours, they killed, sexually assaulted, and murdered all these and tortured many, many, many individuals. A majority of them were women and children. And later, the UN Commission labeled it as an act of genocide, which is very brave for them, because nowadays we can't even get that label. And the person in charge who was personally responsible in this report was then Defense Secretary Ariel Sharon, and we will visit him later as well. So people who do war crimes in certain places can, still have a political career and be leaders of states as well. So this is a massacre that happened in 82, and, it still reverberates and has implications to this day in refugee camps in Lebanon and all the way from all the refugees. So moving on, we have the first Intifada, which kind of happened in 87. So Intifada is termed as an uprising or shaking. And if you were to Google shaking off, many times what comes up is a certain song by Taylor Swift, but the algorithm with Taylor Swift is very strong. She took over the NFL last year as well. So, but anyway, what caused the Intifada? What caused this uprising? Because people were so fed up with what was going on. The frustrations of the people were growing because the economic status and the colonies and the settlers were increasing their homes' economic condition, and people need a change. So these illustrations are very nice. I found these on History Illustrated on Al Jazeera. If you want to look up and follow up on that, mashallah, they break it down into very interactive and very in-your-face caricatures of what happened and kind of breaks it down history. Basically, like I mentioned, legal settlements were growing in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and pretty much everything was kind of coming to a boiling point and just needed a spark to ignite the uprising and ignite the Intifada. And that happened with the incident that took place when an Israeli truck killed 4 Palestinians in the Jabalia refugee camp. And if you've been following, Jabalia is in the Gaza Strip, it's in Gaza, and slowly these protests kind of trickled and moved into the West Bank as well. So the classic modus operandi, the playbook, the protocol that was given to the Israeli government during the first Intifada was they were literally told break bones, defy, scare people. So in their reports, they clearly state that we were told to break bones, torture people, kill people. And you see for almost 6 years, the death toll was over 1,000 Palestinians were killed and barely 100 Israeli soldiers. And that ratio is usually much higher these days as well, and kind of keeps to that ratio. So with that, the current conditions that were there, people wanted to change. And what transitioned into after the first Intifada came the Oslo Accords. This is a famous picture on the White House lawn with Isaac Rabin, then Prime Minister, and Yasser Arafat. Like we mentioned, he was the PLO chairman. And pretty much when this happened with Mr. Bill Clinton in the middle over there on the White House lawn, it recognized the Palestinian in both ways. Alhamdulillah, the state of Israel was recognized by the Palestinian Authority, and vice versa, that Israel recognized that the PLO was the active or governing government for the Palestinian people. There were certain things that came from this, and we'll discuss this later, but the main points is very, very, very important to note that there were two major points that were not discussed in these peace accords. Was number one, the status of Jerusalem. Number two, the active illegal settlements that continue to pop up in the West Bank and Gaza. And three, the right to return for these refugees. And we see the diaspora of the Palestinian people all across the region, even into America as well. And these were not addressed in these accords. So, but what was discussed and what was worked on is the Gaza Strip and the West Bank were they were promised to be governed by the PLO. And even with that, as you can see, this blue area is still Israeli controlled. And these chunks of land, that being the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, they were sectioned into 3 different areas, A, B, and C, and only 18% of the area would be under full Palestinian control. If you add up areas B and C, Israel still had a presence and authority over 82% of the promised land that was given to the Palestinian people. Some called it, a great deal, but even with that, we see the numbers don't match up. It really does not make sense. It's not even a contiguous area for the people of Palestine to have a state. You have 2 separate pieces of land separated by the states of Israel. It's not even homogenous to where they can freely move to and from these different territories. So moving on, like I said, it pretty much shows the alien demarcation lines of the different towns and how the areas was divvied up in the Oslo Accords, with Area A just 18% of the land, which is supposed to be completely for the Palestinian people. The settlements is pretty much like it states over there, a Jewish compound built on Palestinian land. So overnight, a lot of things you see in the West Bank is people come in, the Israeli military comes in, and it tells you to get out pretty much. If your house is on top of a mountain in a strategic point, they just come throw out your stuff and they just tell you that we're taking this over. This is our house. If it's your farm, they cut down your trees, they start farming, and under international law, all these settlements are illegal. Yet to this day, the illegal settlements and the settler violence continues without any obstruction to that. And the one major thing that people talk about anytime they know about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is when they went to the settlements, when they went to the occupied territories of Gaza and West Bank, they saw the reality of the people and what kind of life that they lived. It totally changed their perspective. So anytime, people talk and you're in a discussion, they'll tell you about everything is equal, it's their land, it's things. But subhanAllah, if you just tell them, just go see what a normal Palestinian goes through in his daily life, and their whole aspect is changed on the event. Speaking of settler violence, another major event that occurred, which I like to highlight, was the Ibrahimi Mosque massacre, which happened in 94. So this was an American settler named Baruch Goldstein, who was a physician. Obviously, he did not believe in the Hippocratic oath of do no harm. So on the last Friday of Ramadan, which pretty much we witnessed yesterday for ourselves, people were at the Ibrahimi Mosque. Ibrahimi Mosque is the mosque where the grave of Prophet Ibrahim is, and it's holy to both Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So people were worshiping in this mosque for Fajr prayer. As soon as they went to sujood, this settler, Mr. Goldstein, he came up with his gun and he fired upon the people while they were in sujood and Fajr prayer. And 29 people were killed and many, many more were injured. And the consequence of that was, before, the Ibrahimi Mosque was under complete control of the Muslims, and they allowed the Jewish worshippers to enter and do their rituals as well. But after that, under the pretext of security for the Muslims, Israel took over 60% of the mosque and 40% was given back to the Muslims. And there's a very nice video. It's very short. You can watch it on Turning Point. I give you the link on there if you want to learn more about that. All right, moving on. Then we come up to the second Intifada. There was a lot of dissatisfaction with the Oslo Accords. Things were not getting better for the Palestinian people. There were a lot of promises that were made that were not kept. And the economic situation, the daily lives were just not getting better for the Palestinian people, and all the promises were not kept. They were signed on, they were agreed on, but claimed that both sides didn't hold up end of the bargains. So pretty much what sparked the Second Intifada was, like I mentioned before, the former Defense Secretary of Israel, Ariel Sharon, who was then the Prime Minister. He made a visit on the Temple Mount, the Haram al-Sharif, Al-Aqsa complex, and he claimed in September of 2000 that the Temple Mount is in our hands. So this sparked obviously major protest and violence. And the first Intifada was, defined by protest and stone throwing. There was a huge clampdown in the Second Intifada, and the Israeli force was very disproportionate, and they used extreme measures to quell the protests. And they wanted to show a show of strength, basically, because they had just evacuated and quote unquote lost in Lebanon. So pretty much they wanted to show the invincibility of the IDF, and they were more extreme in fighting, handing out collective punishment for the people during these protests. So like I mentioned, daily life of the Palestinians, this is what they were going through: severe restriction of movement, collective punishment, arrests without trial, even for minors. It doesn't matter if you were just stone thrower, if you're 14, 15, you were just thrown into prison without due process or any charge. And the checkpoints, and we'll mention the checkpoints and the wall in our next slides. So basically implemented the wall in 2002, and you can see the extent of this abomination. Instead of making peace, they're building walls for their security. They built this wall on Palestinian territory, not on, you can see in here in these maps, not on the armistice green line, but this wall is built on Palestinian property, and it basically shuts off and quarantines different parts of the city. So basically, if you were living and you had relatives in the city, what took you 5 minutes to visit now takes you over an hour with different checkpoints. And if you're trying to get to work, if you're trying to get to school overnight, you're just quarantined off in your own land, in your own city, and life is just miserable for you. And like I mentioned before, people who visit, people who are quote unquote, they say they're all for the Jewish cause, they're all for the Zionist cause. When they actually visit and see the life that goes through and these people are subjected to, the people of Palestine in the West Bank, their mind changes, and it's a whole new awakening for them. This slide just highlights the different checkpoints, just ad hoc, like I said, even flying checkpoints, or they just pop up overnight. You would have people come in and make temporary checkpoints, which wasn't there. So what took you to get to work about an hour, 2 hours, the time doubles. And it's at the whim and desire of the security personnel with facial recognition who just deny you access because he's having a bad day, and he could just tell you to go back. No, you can't go through. Just freedom of movement. So this is quote unquote textbook definition of an apartheid state, where people on the other side in the settlements, they have green lawns, they have swimming pools, they have their yards, they have their farmland, yet the other people are second and third grade citizens that do not, avail any of this opportunities or use of the land for themselves and the resources. So we move on to the Gazan wars, and Hamas takes control of Gaza. Hamas, as we know, it's been in the news, and pretty much it came into existence in 87 under the leadership of Imam Ahmad Yassin, and it's an Arab acronym for Islamic Resistance Movement, which pretty much means, the literal definition is zeal or enthusiasm. And pretty much they won elections, but it was not recognized by the international authority. So there was a power struggle between the Fatah movement, which is the political wing of the PLO, but they were granted governorship and they started to govern Gaza, which led to many blockades, embargoes, and economic sanctions. 2008 to present, you have more than 5 armed attacks by the Israeli people on the Gaza Strip. And life, pretty much, there is an attack and there's cessation of hostilities, but over the years, small strip of land has been subject to so many military conflicts. And even though, like I said, it says in the quote of Noam Chomsky, talk about ceasefire, ceasefire, and the violations never cease during those ceasefires as well. So, quote unquote, the Israeli military claims to be the most moral army, self-proclaimed most moral army on the face of the earth, yet they commit, so many horrendous acts of crimes that are just not even imaginable. Certain events we kind of breeze through that happened in 2017. Donald Trump announced that it would recognize Israel as full capital of the state of Israel, and they moved their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in 2018. And a preview of what was to happen when the current situation in 2002, Al Jazeera journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was pretty much shot in Jenin in Kobad, Israeli sniper, but they totally denied it. And pretty much this was a preview of what to come in the current situation where we see aid workers, journalists being targeted in this conflict. So, like I said, words cannot, or images cannot speak of atrocities and what's going on. We're pretty much well aware of what's going on. These are just few major highlight bullet points of what's going on. It is certainly a man-made famine. It's not due to natural causes. People in power can stop this, and people want it. It refuses to bring aid, water, and electricity to these people. You think schools, hospitals, and places of worship, including mosques and churches were destroyed, and Israel even kills its own hostages who are waving white flags, and that's one of their proposed objectives of the war, to bring back the hostages. South Africa kind of going through one of the nations that brought legal proceeding at the International Court of Justice against Israel to hold it accountable for genocide. And most recently, towards the end of March, we had the ceasefire notion that was passed as well, but it's totally ignored by Israel, and we know what's going on in the atrocities and the killings. Not that pretty much tells you what's happening. It's a map of how much destruction and bombardment and ammunition was used to pretty much level one of the most densely populated area on the planet. And as of right now, day is day 183 of the conflict. We know the numbers. We've all seen it. It's just heartbreaking to see that this still continues. And this is just the diaspora of the Palestinians all throughout the different countries. 6.5 in the world. That's mainly between Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. So they're fourth generation people in these refugee camps that still have no status. They don't have a right to return, and their total existence is in limbo. And like I said, we're coming to a close. So that year, the code was made in 1914. So this is not a new thing. This has been going on since the turn of the previous century, of the 19th century. Ever since then, people from Palestine have been threatened. Their own existence, their own culture has been threatened, and it continues to do so. May Allah grant them freedom and get them away from all the shackles of the oppressor. These are some of mainly all the resources. These are Jewish scholars and historians as well in their own words that I used for this presentation. So these are some of the authors if you want to look up and further your knowledge on these topics. They're excellent, and these are coming from, like I said, Jewish experts and scholars. And that is it. If you have any questions, Jazakallah khair, barakallah feek. I know I went a little bit over. Timer is telling me, but alhamdulillah, hopefully that was beneficial for everyone.